September 9, 1948. The Supreme People's Assembly in the northern part of the Korean Peninsula approves a declaration on the establishment of a new state. Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Meanwhile, a massive celebration is being held across the country. At the center of it stands 36-year-old man calling himself Kim Il-sung, which loosely translates Kim, reaching for the sun. Compared to most of the other delegates, he is young, charismatic, and also infinitely more ambitious. Now he is happy. He has just taken a major step towards fulfilling his lifelong goal of creating a unified Korean state and gaining absolute power there. In the end, he will be destined to remain halfway. Korea will never be unified. However, on the other hand, the power he will gain in the northern part of the peninsula will go beyond the craziest imagination. He was born in 1912 in Mangjongda village, which is now a suburb of the capital Pyongyang. His original name was Kim Song-ju. 2 years before his birth, Korea fell under harsh Japanese rule. Kim's parents took it particularly hard. They were patriots and devout Christians. Kim even learned to play the organ as a child. When he was 7, his father was imprisoned for participating in anti-Japanese protests. The visit to the prison, where he saw his father beaten, desperate and humiliated, left a permanent mark on the little boy. When his family fled to neighboring China to escape the Japanese, he joined the communist guerrillas attacking Japanese border positions in Korea at the age of 19. Half a century later, it will be a tradition in North Korea that it was Kim, now under his new name with the guerrillas, who liberated Korea. It's propaganda, of course, but the fact remains that young Kim was a great leader, and at the age of 24, he was already commanding hundreds of men. The partisan resistance is nevertheless suppressed, leaving Kim and his people with one last relatively safe place, the Soviet Union. He has been living here since 1940, studying Stalin's views and methods diligently, and here in the village of Vyatskoye near Khabarovsk, his firstborn son Kim Jong-il will also be born in 1941. Although, according to official North Korean data, the younger Kim was not born in a remote Siberian village but on the slopes of Korea's sacred Paektusa mountain. Fast forward to 1945. World War II in Europe ends and the Soviet Union has a free hand to declare war on Japan. And on August 24th, Soviet troops enter Pyongyang. In the north of the Korean peninsula, the Soviet occupation zone is established. And this is where the chance of a lifetime begins for Kim Il-sung. He's 33 years old. After years in exile, he returns home and begins to build his power, albeit only to Soviet standards. Three years later, however, the situation is different. Kim has a large and reliable army in his republic, and the Soviets are withdrawing from the country. The time is ripe for the next step, to subjugate the southern part of the peninsula, which is under American control.
이 괴국주의자들이 친일파 민족 반역자들이 지지하에서 우리 3천만 민족을 분열하고 우리 조국의 강토를 자기네의 식민지로 만들려고 활동하는 데 있으니 우리 조국에는 위기가 닥쳐왔으니
On June 25, 1950, at 4 o'clock in the morning, 175,000 North Korean troops rolled across the border. Between North and South Korea at the 38th parallel, one of the most horrific, and in its outcome most senseless, wars of the 20th century had begun. The battlefront moved back and forth across the Korean peninsula with such a speed unlike perhaps any other conflict. By early September 1950, South Korea controlled only a tiny sliver of territory in the very south of the country, around the city of Busan. By the end of October, however, the situation was completely reversed. Kim Il-sung was now pushed into a narrow strip of mountains in the very north of his country. But even that was not the end. China entered the war and the twists and turns continued until 1953 when the two exhausted sides signed an armistice. They restored the border on the 38th parallel and thus returned to exactly where the whole terrible conflict began. For Kim, it is a defeat of a lifetime. He has not achieved his goal, moreover, after the massive American bombing, his country is in ruins. Of the 10 million inhabitants, 2 million died. But Kim is dealing with the criticism very firmly. First and foremost, he will flood the entire country with an unprecedented wave of propaganda. He will create a cult of personality worthy of a god. He's just omnipresent, infallible. Always kind. But even all this would not be enough. The other side of the coin needs to be felt, and that is fear. Kim is wiping out his opponents by the thousands, and with them, other groups that don't suit him. Among other things, he will completely wipe out the large Christian community he belonged to as a boy. The 60,000-strong secret police is almost almighty, and people are forced to spy on and denounce each other. The regime controls everything. You can even get in trouble for not having the leader's portrait printed on good enough paper, or for accidentally wrapping a parcel in newspaper with his photograph. In a country that is completely isolated, there are three basic groups of people, essentially castes. The absolutely loyal, the hesitant, and then the hostile. Hundreds of thousands of them are sentenced to life in labor camps whose cruelty is, in a word, boundless.
그런 시스템이 있어가지고 우리 가족을 전부 다 이렇게 엮어가지고 차에다 실어서 이제 수용소로 끌고 갔지. 할아버지는 아예 다른 수용소에 끌려가가지고 그러니까 육체적으로 감당하기 힘든 노동에 동원됐는데 정신적으로 힘든 거는 이제 가끔 그러니까 이런 것들을 다 보게 하는데 그러니까 목을 매달려서 죽는 사람을 처음 봤고.
Using these methods, Kim Il-sung took his country through the entire second half of the 20th century. When he dies of cardiac arrest in 1994, he can be content. He may not have reunified Korea, but by successfully handing over power to his eldest son, he thus established a communist dynasty. Neither Stalin in Soviet Union nor Mao Zedong in China succeeded in that. Today, the Kim dynasty continues to rule North Korea. After Kim Jong-il's death, his son Kim Jong-un took over, and the Kim family's rule has thus lasted 3/4 of a century. In the United States, there have been 13 presidents in that time. But what about the country itself? It is suffering. After the collapse of the socialist bloc in Europe, the total lack of freedom was compounded by enormous economic problems, including famine, which killed at least 500,000 people in the 90s, but according to some estimates, as many as 3 million. North Korea is today the most isolated country in the world, and the unbridled propaganda surrounding the person of its founder could be laughed at with relish. If only everything else wasn't so terrible.